Welcome to the Anxious Love Coach podcast, a place for creating meaningful, conscious, secure, long-term partnerships. Here, we talk relationship anxiety and creating healthy, magnetic dynamics within partnership to help you feel confident and alive within committed partnership. My name is Natalie Kennedy, and I'm your host. I'm a relationship anxiety coach and meditation teacher. I've worked with hundreds of clients battling anxiety, and after experiencing extraordinary shifts in my own healing relative to partnership, now combine my lived personal experience and professional training to help others trust themselves within relationship and in their lives. I've been to the edge and back with my now husband from relationship anxiety and come out confidently to the other side. I want to pass the tools I've learned along to you to help you trust yourself in relationships and also create magnetic, hot dynamics with your partner. I believe lots of mainstream relationship advice today can make us anxious and dissatisfied. So let's jump in and normalize challenges that modern relationships and real people go through while also giving you tools to trust yourself, drop the shame, and alchemize your messy, twisted relational truths into profound inner wisdom and aliveness. If you haven't yet, be sure to join my communities over on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Anxious Love Coach. You can also request a 30-minute relationship anxiety assessment with me depending on availability, or ask me a question over on my website at www.anxiouslovecoach.com. I've also got a wonderful relationship anxiety meditation available to you as thanks for subscribing to my email list. Thanks for being here and enjoy this episode. Hello. Welcome back to the podcast. Thanks for being here. In today's episode, I'd like to talk about numbness. I had a question last month on my Patreon that I didn't get a chance to answer, and I realized I haven't had a, at least recent episode on numbness, so I felt inspired to address it this week. And this is really about working with numbness toward your partner, sort of. And I say sort of because since I don't believe that people necessarily cause us numbness directly unless they are abusive, but assuming that you are not in an abusive relationship, you are with a safe and healthy partner, I'm going to assume that if you are in that relationship, that your partner is not necessarily causing your numbness. And since that is what I believe, then I'm going to extricate the relationship as the quote unquote cause of numbness. I'll explain why shortly and speak to working with numbness in general. I remember when I was experiencing relationship anxiety, I'd often oscillate between feeling completely overwhelmed and flooded with very painful and shameful emotions, and feeling absolutely nothing, even numb, when looking at or interacting with my partner, my now husband, Preston, who I've been with for almost 11 years now, and is the absolute love of my life. Oh my goodness. But at the time, again, this is maybe 3 to 7 years in, so like 4 or 5 years of that. At the time, it was really agonizing. I felt dead inside. And on top of that, I felt guilty for being so dead inside because from my perception, my partner looked so in love with, concerned with, and worried about me. His behavior I interpreted as desperation. He seemed like he desperately wanted us to be connected and intimate and close again. And I felt utterly responsible for each disappointment upon my lack of reciprocity. But interestingly enough, ironically, I also felt like my husband Preston was the cause of my numbness. Isn't that interesting? I simultaneously feel responsible for his process, and yet I am feeling like he is responsible for my inner process. And this is very common for a lot of people who are struggling with relationship anxiety to also struggle with codependency and thinking that we are responsible for making them feel how they feel and they are responsible for making us feel how we feel. Not to say that we don't have influence over how our partners feel, but there's a great deal of difference between having influence over our partner's inner experience and being responsible for our partner's inner experience. So I would look at my partner, feel nothing, or so I thought. I felt something that I labeled nothing. But since I believed that I should be feeling something other than what I was currently feeling and judging myself for it, I'd feel really horrible. I'd feel really guilty. And that guilt would turn into that guilt combined with the lack of feeling. And actually there was some disgust and irritation as well. That would compound and turn into panic. And then the panic would bring my nervous system into such high alert that my nervous system, out of love for me, would go into shutdown to avoid the pain. And whenever this would happen, it felt like being underwater because it was like I would completely withdraw from the external world. I was never fully immersed in my surroundings. It was really tough because whenever the numbness would wear off, it felt like I would just go right back into overwhelm and panic. There is quite a bit of science to back this up. If you want, you can look into polyvagal theory. I have not had any personal training or studies on polyvagal theory, but it is very, I don't want to say congruent, that's not the right word, like compatible with mindfulness practices. But if you want like a more science-based thing around how shutdown works and like green zone, yellow zone, and red zone, and how nervous system works, I highly recommend like going on YouTube and researching polyvagal theory because that's going to explain it much better than I can and by actual qualified professionals to speak on it. I'm going to speak on this from a meditation background, but the kind of principle is very similar. When we go into shutdown, it's to avoid pain. There's a part of us that's like, we are at capacity for feeling this uncomfortable feeling. And we're going to shut it down. It's like our natural inner anesthetic, and it's something to be grateful for, not something to shame yourself for. So I just want to say I get it. But for today, I'm not going to speak on polyvagal theory because A, I am not qualified, and B, that is my only reason. I wanted to sound good. Anyway, so some ways that I would distract myself at the time were actually not really distractions at all. They were kind of ways to pull myself out of the numbness. It's like by doing these defensive behaviors, I would get myself to feel something again because being numb is a really uncomfortable feeling. It's better than being in a panic, but it's not empowerment. So I would do things that would kind of try to bring some aliveness back into me, but the tricky part is that when you are in a state of numbness and then you have to do something to try to get yourself to feel again, you are overstimulating yourself again, and that actually contributes to the numbness. And so this is how this can become a really deadening cycle where we're constantly on high alert and then totally shut down. So sometimes I would lock myself in my room and I would scroll and I would Google and work myself up into a frenzy until I couldn't feel anything anymore. I would also spend a lot of time working a lot. I also ate a lot. During this time when I was with Preston, it's super weird. If you look at my photos from back in the day, which of course you wouldn't because I don't even have that Instagram anymore. But when I had like a personal Instagram, and if you looked at me like back in, 2016, I was carrying like an extra 15 pounds of just stress weight. And I look like a completely different person. I look younger now at 30 than I did at 25. It's wild. So anyway, that's a little detour. But if you're experiencing numbness in the presence of your partner, you are not alone in the slightest. There are many reasons you might be feeling numbness, and none of them mean that there's something wrong with you. None of them mean that you're a bad person. None of them necessarily mean you're with the wrong partner. There are many reasons you might feel numb just living a life, whether you are single or in a relationship. But as I said in the beginning, the first thing I really want to address is that if you are in a safe, loving relationship, then the relationship is unlikely the cause of your numbness. Just like your relationship cannot be responsible for your aliveness or your joy, it is also unlikely to be responsible for making you feel numb. That said, relationships are mirrors, so they mirror stuff back to us, and there is stuff that can be triggered in a relationship, but it's It's kind of like saying if you were to stand in a mirror and note, I just turned 30 last year and I have found a couple of wrinkles that were not there before. And I got triggered because I've been programmed just like the rest of all the women in the world. Actually, that's not true. Not everyone has been programmed, but I noticed like, oh my God, I'm not beautiful anymore. Like that thought just creeped up in my mind. And even though I know that that's not true, this insecurity and anxiety popped up and my brain had an intrusive thought about, oh my God, what if I'm not lovable anymore? What if I'm not valuable anymore? The reason I'm bringing up this analogy is because the mirror didn't cause the trigger. The mirror, if let's say I went into a panic about aging, right? The mirror is not the cause of the feeling, right? What was already there is the cause of the feeling. The mirror just showed you. The mirror just shone a light on what was already hurting. And that's what I mean by, someone else could look in that same mirror and not feel triggered at all and have nothing but loving thoughts. So the mirror might not cause it. And similarly, our relationships don't cause it, but they can reveal things to us about ourselves that are triggering and scary. And that is what we need to work with. My meditation teacher, Steffi Price, who I'm going to mention a few times today, I think, mentioned that when we get triggered, and triggers often happen first before we shut down into numbness. When we get triggered, it's not because someone did something harmful to us. It's not like from the outside in, someone else penetrates our inner world and does something at us or to us. Rather, there was pain already there. They just shone a flashlight on it. So once we extricate the relationship as the cause of the relationship, we can get curious, we can get compassionate and think, what's getting highlighted in me, right? There are some things that can get triggered internally through our relationship mirror that can lead to numbness. Today, I'd like to explain why you might be feeling numbness, and also to give you some strategies to start to thaw the numbness and drop into the more tender feelings underneath. So there's more reasons than I could cover in a podcast, but I'm going to start with 3 very common ones, reasons why you might be feeling numb and what you can do about it. Number 1 is a lack of boundaries in your life. If you are overwhelmed and overstimulated, your nervous system is going to try to protect you from basically death by overstimulation, emotional death. It's very, very painful. It could be a matter of external boundaries you need to set, such as being in a toxic workplace, or in the case of if you actually are in a toxic, abusive relationship, your numbness might be a way of protecting you from abuse. But assuming that that's not the case, you could be having external factors like what you're consuming in the media, like movies or tons of social media. Could also be food that you're consuming that's overstimulating. Alcohol, sugar, substances, could be light pollution. We're in Bangkok right now, and it is probably the most overstimulating city I have ever been in. I'm sure there's places that are more overstimulating, but for me, it's a lot. There's not a lot of nature for me to really reset my nervous system. So I'm a little bit more numb and on high alert, and that makes sense, right? So it could be also a lot of noise. If you live in a noisy environment, that could be a cause as well. So notice just like, what are things that you have normalized in your environment that are contributing to being overstimulated, to which your nervous system is going to try to protect you by kind of, again, like I said, providing you that natural anesthetic so that you don't have to feel the extent of it and you can actually connect with yourself a little bit easier. Even though it's painful, it's some part of our nervous system finds that the numbness preferable to pain. Of course, that would make sense, wouldn't it? So it's very common to want to blame our partners and want potentially out of the relationship. But if your numbness is caused by overconsumption, we will still be overwhelmed after the breakup unless we change our circumstances, which we can change while we're in partnership. So do not wait until you are single to take extraordinary care of yourself. Close yourself to external variables that are harming you. Caffeine, alcohol, sugar, news, social media. I recently cut out gluten, dairy, red meat, and caffeine, and I feel amazing. It's incredible how much I have eaten gluten my whole life, and it's not like I got in a diagnosis or anything, but Preston and I are thinking about having a baby. And I was like, I want to cut out some inflammatory things. So I cut out gluten, and holy shit, do I feel better. Wow. Can I say it's gluten, or is it just I just stopped eating a bunch of processed food? Who knows? Either way, a lot of these foods are really overstimulating. The more things you say no to that are not serving you, the more space you will have to nurture and be nurtured by things that are a yes to you, such as your relationship. If you're not taking care of yourself, your partner's going to be receiving your breadcrumbs, and loving them is going to feel like something on your to-do list. Number 2, and I've talked about this, another reason you might be feeling numb inside your relationship is because of attachment wounds. In my course, Both Feet In, I talk about how when we have learned to associate love with pain, a safe relationship is going to bring all of these repressed emotions to the surface. So notice your beliefs about love. Do you believe, for instance, that you need to rescue your partner, or that they need to rescue you? If so, you might feel burdened and resentful, but these emotions may be old and rooted in childhood based on patterns that you lived out when you were young. Maybe that was actually true for you at that time. Even though it's not true now, your body is still registering that as truth. And it may not be working for you in this context anymore. And so you're sort of responding to the fight or flight from the past. It's important to process these emotions in a creative, loving, contained way, rather than unleashing them on our partners and then feeling guilty and overwhelmed after. Having a mindfulness and movement practice, and I'm going to give you a bunch of these at the end of our session today, can give us a safe space to allow these emotions to move up and out in a safe way. Once we have ridden through the hump of these previously overwhelming emotions, and I say hump, and oh my God. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna make hump a weird word today. We gotta get over the hump. And if you look at the polyvagal theory diagram, you'll notice that there is a hump of emotions, big emotions. So it's very exciting for me to see that like the spiritual and the science practices are kind of pointing in the same direction. Anyway, once we've ridden through the hump of these previously overwhelming emotions, they pass. And we're left with this like spaciousness that allows for a quiet stillness in the mind, an open heart, and eyes that can finally see our relationship clearly without projection and distortion. And you'll be able to more easily see where you end and where your partner begins, so that you aren't getting muddled in each other's processes. Because when your eyes are on their paper and their eyes are on your paper, it's overwhelming. And of course our nervous system's going to be like, this is too much. So rather than trying to figure out whether our partner is the one or if they're good enough and am I settling in all of these things, all of these thoughts that pigeonhole us into right and wrong and black and white thinking, we almost need to question the whole belief system itself, right? So rather than trying to figure out the question or the answer to the question, let's take a look at the question itself. And my last reason for today that you might be feeling numbness in your relationship or in general is if you are on any kind of medications. I say this both from a mindfulness perspective as a coach who has worked with clients on medications, but also, believe it or not, I have a pharmaceutical science background. I got like my bachelor's in pharmacy, so I know a thing or two about medications, even though I didn't go to pharmacy school, at least enough to speak on a lot of these medications. The tricky thing about a lot of medications that act to suppress overwhelming emotions that we might call negative, some of these are like antidepressants or anti-anxiety medications, is they function to shut down negative emotions, which is a good thing when they're overwhelming. But one of the side effects is they shut off all positive emotions too. So I just want to offer the disclaimer that I am not and never have been and never will be anti-medication. I believe in many contexts that they are necessary. And as I said, that's coming from both my pharmaceutical and my holistic health backgrounds. As with many other controversial things, two things are simultaneously true. Medications can be useful, and they are not without side effects and consequences. It's not it's not just a free pass. You gain something, but you lose something too. So don't make your decision based on this podcast. I just want to let you know that numbness can be a side effect of taking medications if you are taking them. I recommend working with your doctor as well as with a practitioner that can gently resensitize you to feeling. So I'm going to give you a lot of practices in a bit that you can be doing alongside with your doctor. So those are my 3 reasons. There are more, but I think these are probably the most common ones, is a lack of boundaries and being overstimulated. You've said yes to far too many things and your body is now protesting. Number 2 is going to be attachment wounds that are coming up and getting activated and your body's like, too much. And then number 3 is medications. With all that said, overcoming anxiety and depression is not about feeling less. Like, I want to feel less anxiety. I want to feel less depressed. The answer is not about feeling less. It's actually about feeling more. So if you've ever had the experience of going to a country that isn't one of the, I want to say, you could argue either way, but for simplicity, I'm going to argue if you've been to a country that isn't one of the super industrialized places like the United States, and you suddenly start eating really clean and minimalist, some places where it's really easy for me to eat clean are places like Italy, places like Colombia, really actually a lot of countries in Europe where a lot of toxic substances have been banned. Every time I go to Europe, I used to go to Russia a lot when I was younger because my family's Russian, and I would just shed a bunch of weight and I would not even be training or working out. Just their food is so much cleaner and minimalist, and they don't need to add a bunch of stuff to make their shitty food quality taste better like in the US. They've got higher quality ingredients that need less stuff to dress it up. So things are more minimalist. Whenever I go to Colombia, the food tastes more bland if I'm coming from the United States because they're just using fewer things. So anyway, if you've been to one of these countries where the food's cleaner, your taste buds will adjust to not having sugar and salt and all these excess flavorings and glutamates and additives. I remember living in Colombia and eating food that I thought, present to, was initially very bland to me for like 6 months. But then I got used to it and I didn't even notice the difference. When I came back to the US, my palate was completely shocked and overwhelmed by the flavors. I couldn't believe that this had become my normal until I had adapted to not having it. So that's a food analogy. But similarly, we often don't realize that we are overwhelmed with stimulants and substances and triggers until we remove ourselves for a period of time from them. I'm not just talking about food. It can also be what you're consuming on social media, what kind of friendships you're consuming, what habits you have that are overstimulating, right? One of my teachers named Steffi Price, who's my beloved meditation teacher in Austria, reminded me that in meditation, silence is the best teacher because whatever arises in silence is what needs attention. I had another teacher who was a yoga teacher from many, many years ago named Jade Electra, and I don't remember if this was her quote or if she was quoting something else. In either case, she asked a question that I just loved at the time, and it's, what gets loud when you get quiet? So that's another way of asking that same question. Whatever arises in silence is what needs attention. When we get still and quiet, whatever gets noisy inside of us, that energy that surfaces when nothing is happening, is what needs to move through and out. A lot of us get scared to face it and we push it back down, and now we've got an internal war. And once we have internal war, we start expending a lot of energy, and that is when we tend to get exhausted and check out. So our resistance to what surfaces in stillness creates this exhausting war, and it's common to result in numbness and collapse from feeling altogether. To be fair, this you don't have to have an anxiety disorder to experience this in the modern world. I mean, right now, Press and I are living in this high-rise condo in Bangkok, and we're on like the 26th floor, and the pool that we go to every other day is on the 31st floor. And so sometimes we spend a long time waiting for the elevator to arrive on our floor. And that waiting time, sometimes I feel like emotions come up when I'm just waiting for the elevator. And I've started to dread the elevator because it's like, oh my God, I'm bored. I need something to fill the space. But in reality, there's probably some emotions there. So what gets noisy when there's a gap? What starts getting loud when there's a void, when there's an emptiness? Do you rush to fill it? It's quite the practice to allow what surfaces to move through. Also, that doesn't mean that I'm going to start crying or raging or have a full-blown embodiment practice right there next to the elevator. Having safe places to fall apart is essential. So I'm a big advocate for locking the door, telling people to leave the house, and just being with yourself for a defined amount of time. At the end of the episode today, I'm going to guide you through a short meditation to help with numbness. Really, it's just about, starting to feel again and gently express yourself. So you may want to be in a place where that is possible. As I always say, go very gently. I'm going to give you a list right now, some self-care tips to overcome numbness and also to start to begin to resensitize yourself. First, you want to make sure that you get rid of any external circumstances that are overstimulating you. So whether that's food or certain obligations that are draining you, certain pressures that you've put on yourself, the news, social media, like going on some kind of detox, whether that's a food detox, a gluten detox, sugar detox, whatever you can stick to for a certain amount of time to actually give your body a chance to feel safe enough to let whatever's sitting inside to move up and out. And the list I'm going to provide is going to offer things that complement this, all right? So there's the external part, which is make sure you have good boundaries on your external life. But then there's internal things that you can do to start to feel again. All right, here is my list of things you can do to start to overcome numbness and resensitize yourself to feeling again gently. Get into nature. Right? Nature is one of the biggest healers there are. It's simultaneously dynamic and moving, as well as it's got its own stillness, and it shows us a lot about yin and yang. And there are no questions that I have taken to nature that haven't gotten answered in some kind of metaphorical way. So nature is a great healer and can do a lot. As I said before, remove substances, alcohol, caffeine, sugar, pesticides. If you've been eating things like dairy, gluten, and red meat often, experiment with taking those things out. And what you'll notice is when you take out these things, soy as well for some people, especially women, what you'll notice is that when you cut all of this out, that doesn't leave very much, does it? It just shows you how these foods have been subsidized and worked into everything. So it's no wonder that people are being flooded with these and developing sensitivities to them. If you realize how difficult it is to stop eating these things, realize that it was not always this way in history. We had a much more diverse diet, like in our hunter-gatherer days. I could talk about the agricultural revolution, but I'm not going to do that. Part of the reason we are so sensitive to these foods, I think, is that they are in absolutely everything because it's cheap. Anyway, okay, let's continue this list. Some other things you can do. Go swimming. If you find that you've got a lot of energy inside of you that seems to surface in silence, things like boxing, Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu. Some people do really, really well with gentle things like swimming and yoga. Other people do really well with things that are more rough, like Muay Thai, boxing, MMA, kickboxing. So try these out. See how it works for you. Yoga. I taught yoga for 7 years. There are some things I love about yoga and some things I really do not love about yoga. For example, I'm already flexible and yoga made me more flexible, and now I'm having to remobilize a bunch of joints in my body. However, from a mindfulness perspective, it's really hard to beat yoga. It's a phenomenal way to get back in your body and become more present and connected to yourself. So there's that. Pilates also, another wonderful way to wake up asleep muscles, which really is about making the unconscious conscious in kind of a metaphorical way. Pilates has been wonderful for activating my inner strength. Some other practices are Tai Chi and Qigong. I've also recently started doing gua sha and dry brushing. I believe that anything that takes a conscious effort and allows you to connect with your body, even if it's through on a surface level like gua sha, massage, and dry brushing, even applying makeup can be an act of self-love. We are touching our bodies. And that said, self-pleasure, masturbation can also be a way of waking up asleep parts of us. Listening to meditations on Insight Timer. This is one of my favorite apps. I used to just sit in silence, but nowadays I like the accountability of having someone guide me. Personally, I really like Sarah Blondin, Blondin. She has a lot of meditations on grief and letting go and being really attached to things and kind of indirectly working with transitions. And a lot of us who are dealing with relationship anxiety are going through rough transitions. And where there are transitions, there is usually grief sitting around the corner. And Sarah Blondin's meditations on grief are some of the best I've ever heard. Another thing that you can do to work with numbness is grounding. There is a lot of research suggesting that putting your feet in the grass and feeling the sensation of the dirt in your toes can help you reconnect with yourself. Touching trees. I am one of those people that thinks that they can sense energy in trees, but I completely understand people who are like, that sounds insane. So there are also, I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe there is some research showing that these things can allow you to absorb negative ions, which have antioxidant properties. Okay, if that is not right, please do not write me a scathing podcast review saying Natalie said something woo-woo. You can write me on Instagram and tell me that I was wrong, and then I will say thank you, but I'm not going to re-edit this whole podcast. So don't quote me on that. There is a lot of research on grounding and positive benefits of putting your feet in the dirt and touching trees. So we'll just leave it at that. Another way to work with numbness is to have some kind of spiritual practice, whatever that looks like for you. It could be Insight Timer. It could be getting out into nature. For some people, it's prayer. I've started to engage in my own variations of prayer, but you can have your own ways that you do it. Some people pray to God. Some people acknowledge Jesus. Some people talk to their spirit guides or channels, or honestly, whatever gets you into some kind of practice with the divine, to me, is what is most important. I think a spiritual practice is absolutely essential to working with anxiety, because anxiety is often rooted in the fear of uncertainty and the unknown. And one of the things that allows us to feel safe with the unknown is to feel that we're held by something greater than ourselves. And so having some sort of spiritual practice, some sort of trust in the divine, or trust that we're being watched or we're being guided, this can be a very profound shift in your healing. And we got a few more here. Take a road trip alone. If you're feeling overstimulated because you're constantly looking at your partner and worrying about how they're feeling, and that is causing you to feel guilty and then eventually feel numb from the shutdown, sometimes most loving thing you can do is, without breaking up with them, get away from them. Spend some time alone. Maybe it's a road trip for a weekend, a creative trip where you just paint or make pottery. I don't know. Take a road trip by yourself if you can. Something else you can do, this kind of goes along the same lines of swimming. Take baths. Water is very cleansing, and water is one of those things that is simultaneously something that we can feel with our senses and touch, but it's not a overstimulating substance. Any sort of mindfulness practices you can do, whether that's Insight Timer or yoga or Tai Chi, any mindfulness practice is going to help you gently resensitize and start feeling a little bit more, especially if you're used to feeling there's black and white thinking. There's also black and white feeling absolutely nothing and then feeling all the things. And right, a lot of us who are experiencing numbness, we're oscillating between feeling nothing or we're feeling something that we're calling nothing. We're feeling nothing, or we're feeling all the things, and it's too much. Mindfulness practices can help you start to feel a little bit more gray things. So we're not feeling nothing, we're feeling a little bit, but we're not feeling everything at once to the point where we're flooded and shut down. Massage can be wonderful as well, because if you use your massage as a mindfulness practice, you can start to pay attention to what you are feeling when and where. And massage can be really wonderful for that. And lastly, I encourage you, as you practice all of these things, to practice self-compassion and curiosity and non-judgment. It's very, very difficult to overcome numbness if you are beating yourself up for feeling numb. That just makes us feel more under attack by our own minds and causes us to want to shut down more. It is far more beneficial and effective to get curious, almost to see this blanket of numbness that just got thrown over you, and to say, oh, thank you for protecting me from like these big feelings. Tell me more. You can have a sort of dialogue with your numbness and see what it's here to protect you from. And that is far more effective in removing numbness than any kind of self-judgment. But sometimes we need to judge ourselves a little further before we realize how futile judgment is. You'll notice that all these things, this whole list of things, will get you back into your body, into feeling something. And you'll also notice that they aren't these big magic pill type of things. None of these are just a quick fix, a magical fix-it pill. A lot of these things you'll need to do in tandem. So as you're listening to this, or maybe you scroll back and write these things down, some of these are going to work for you, some of them won't. Some of them will work really well in conjunction with other things. Like maybe you do massage and Muay Thai, right? And you get rid of alcohol. So I'm just throwing a bunch of things at you, and you can start to just pay attention to what you feel drawn to. Move in the direction of self-care. We must prioritize self-care when we are in recovery from any kind of anxiety or depression. We must put ourselves in the positions to heal and feel again, gently. If you begin to do these practices, I really believe that emotions may start to surface naturally. You don't have to try to force yourself to feel them. Relax your jaw, your belly, your shoulders while you're doing these exercises, and just start to subtly let your body know that it's safe for feelings to surface. And when your partner is loving on you, rather than focus on trying to be a good person and reciprocating, I recommend you to say thank you. Give your partner the pleasure of you receiving without giving them anything in return. It's going to sound weird. You don't have to be mean, but you also don't have to, while you're recovering and starting to figure out how to love yourself again while in a relationship that's imperfect, you can give your partner the pleasure of you receiving their gift by saying thank you. And ironically, as you open up to receiving and trusting that people are loving on you without strings attached, in time, as you start to receive more and more, you're going to naturally start to feel more abundant and generous. And those love feelings that you're so longing to feel, and those trusting feelings that you're so longing to feel, and the connection, that will come as you start to overflow from self-care. Before we close today, I'd love to guide you through a short, silent mindfulness practice to help you with resensitizing your feelings. You may want to set a couple boundaries and pause this recording and tell people to not disturb you for 10 minutes. If you feel comfortable, I might invite you to make some movement or sound, and you can tell the people that you're setting boundaries with that you might be making some noise. So feel free to pause this podcast in the meantime until you're ready to have a seat. All right, welcome back. So go ahead and set up a comfortable, quiet space, as quiet as possible. You may choose to sit up or lie down. do yourself a favor and make yourself just a little bit more comfortable. So if you're lying down, you might set a pillow under your knees. If you're sitting up, you might put a pillow under your tail or behind your low back. Once you're there, take a moment to notice what is holding your body in place. Could be gravity, the surface of whatever you're sitting or lying on, the air on your face. Take a gentle inventory of points of contact between you and the outside world, and also points of contact between your body and other parts of your body. So maybe it's the hair on the back of your neck. Maybe it's your arms touching the sides of your body, or your palms on your belly, wherever they are. Just noticing evidence of your existence, neutral sensation. And for now, just breathe normally. If your breath is shallow, you can let it be shallow. If your breath is deep, you can let it be deep. No need to change anything. And then begin to notice what you are currently noticing. What are you aware of? You might notice a combination of thoughts, sensations, emotions, and there may or may not also be a spaciousness surrounding it all. You may notice that some things are more obvious to notice, especially if there is numbness or attention. But I encourage you to also see if you can identify things that are neutral as well. Maybe an itch on your foot, or the breath passing in and out of your nostrils. If what you are noticing is your thoughts, see if there are any sensations that arise along with the thoughts. And all you have to do is just name them in your mind. No need to judge or try to figure out why the feeling is there. It's enough to just say, tight chest, shallow breath, itchy foot. Once you have identified some sensations, notice if there are any emotions connected to the sensations. You might have one or a few, or none at all. Whatever you find is okay. And again, just like the sensations, you can name them if you identify them, but no need to judge or figure out why. You can just let them be there. No need to fix it. And if you identify any emotions, notice if there are any sounds or movements that arise as an impulse from those emotions. So if the emotion of disappointment is present, for instance, notice what disappointment might like to do with you, the vessel of the emotion. If the disappointment could borrow your body as a vehicle for its expression, how would it use you? Would it curl you up into a ball? Would it tremble? So any emotion may have its own impulse. It could look like a dry heaving or even a growl. If there is a numbness, you can see if there is even a sound for the numbness. If you don't feel comfortable making noise, you can also let your facial expression be a reflection of your inner experience. Now, with expression, there are different levels of intensity. Now, in terms of the intensity of expression, you don't have to go to a level 10. It could be just a little bit more than being completely silent. You can always return to silence. In this way, you are slowly discharging the energy from your body. I will sit here in silence with you while you allow any movements or sounds to surface in response to your inner experience. Feel free to make movement or sound for as long as you need to, depending on how long the impulse is there. I will check in with you again in a minute. Preston, go ahead and add another minute here. And again, what are you aware of now? And what impulses arise in response? This is a practice you can return to over and over anytime. When you're in your car, when you're walking, anytime there is some energy moving through. So go ahead and gently begin to return back, starting just by transferring your attention back to the surface of your body, noticing again the points of contact between you and the surfaces of whatever you're lying or sitting on, feeling the air on your face. And then you can gently open your eyes and take in your surroundings. Something I like to do as well is see if I can notice the outside and the inside simultaneously. And as you proceed throughout your day, you can continue to check in with yourself and stay connected to the inside just as much as your external, which, by the way, includes your partner. I hope you enjoyed this episode as well as this meditation. Let me know what you think by sending me a message on Instagram. And if you would like to attend or watch my monthly Q&As and my meditations that I host live, be sure to join my Patreon. I will include the link in the show notes. All right, thank you again for listening today. I hope you have a beautiful day, and I will catch you in the next episode. Thanks. Bye. Thanks so much for listening to The Anxious Love Coach today. If you loved this episode, please hit that subscribe button, leave a review, and follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and maybe share it with someone that you believe might benefit from these perspectives. Please also subscribe to my email list at www.anxiouslovecoach.com, as I'm trying to reduce my reliance on social media. In exchange, you will receive my free relationship anxiety meditation and more supportive tools sent your way. If you would like to work with me, head on over to my website at, again, anxiouslovecoach.com to explore different tiers of coaching options and online programs. Thanks again for listening, and catch you in the next episode. Have a blessed day.